What's up, guys? I'm Sci-Hi with another deck tech or deck analysis of a very strong, straightforward deck that you can absolutely get to Mythic with or grind even higher if you're already in Mythic. But it is the mono white humans build. There's a lot of different ways you can build humans in Historic. A lot of white-green builds are very popular. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But before we get into some of these card choices, if you don't mind for free just liking and subscribing. I know it's the stupidest, most cliche, annoying thing to hear every YouTuber say, but it'll help this channel get started and help us buy some new equipment so it can improve the quality. But anyways, enough of that bullshit. Let's dive into the card choices and talk about why they're in here. At its forefront, White Humans is just a very aggressive tribe, just an aggressive aggro deck. And I love being mono-colored because we get a lot of advantages that oftentimes don't get talked about, but just the consistency of never having to really worry about color issues or mana base issues goes a long way. There certainly is a lot of attractive, really good humans in green as well, but there are enough of them that we can actually and absolutely make mono white work and thrive and grind a top mythic with a deck like this. So without further ado, let's look at the card choices. Coming in at the 1-drop slot, we've got 4 Dauntless Bodyguards. Just a 2/1 human with the ability when he comes into play, you get to choose another creature on the board that you control, and he acts as their bodyguard. You can sack this guy to give that creature indestructible in response to maybe they're trying to shock one of your important creatures, or during combat you can sack this to ensure that one of your creatures survives. But most importantly, this can help give you resistance against the hated and enemy of aggro decks, Wrath of God, board sweep, creature sweep cards. This can give you resistance against that and make it so at least one of your guys can survive the Wrath of God. So very good card, 4 of here, fits in the deck nicely, being that it's a human. So great synergy, obvious for inclusion. Moving on, we've got 4 Esper Sentinel. What can be said about this card? Since it was released, it's been an absolute bomb. I mean, it sees play in Modern, probably Beyond even. But just one of the most annoying cards you can possibly see in a heavy spell-based deck. This is just makes you want to vomit if you're playing just a heavy spell-based control deck or something. You see this get dropped on the first turn. It's just so agonizing. Every time your opponent casts a spell, their first non-creature spell each turn, you're drawing cards unless they pay X, where X is equal to Esper Sentinel's power. And as we'll see, there's a lot of ways to pump up Esper Sentinel's power to make it virtually impossible that your opponent can pay the tax. And so you're just going to be drawing so many cards with this. It's super valuable, and it's a human to boot. So another obvious 4 of inclusion, just a really powerful card. And speaking of the taxing effects, that's kind of a theme going on in this deck as well. It's almost like a Death and Taxes style humans deck. So your opponent's being pressed and taxed here. When they cast a non-creature spell, they often have to decide if they actually want to pay the mana to try to prevent you from drawing a card. And that can really hurt even when they do pay the tax, because we have 4 copies of Mana Tithe, which is absolutely just a hilarious and awesome card. Little silly history with this card. I've way back in the day, to date myself, at I think it was the Wisconsin State Championships. I ended up getting 10th place with a Kithkin build running 4 of this card. But anyways, that's old news. Nowadays, this card is still stronger than ever, especially in like best of 1 or best of 3 historic, where unless you're stream sniping somebody, there's no open deck list. So you have no idea what your opponent has. You don't know if they're running this or not. And really, like the stock human builds, not all of them do run this. So your opponent is really not going to be sure if you're running this, especially right now with the way the meta is. It may seem a little counterintuitive to run a spell in a deck that has Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, but this is the only spell in the deck. So this is the only instance, I guess, if you're familiar with like non-bow term, non-bow being that it doesn't combo well with Thalia because we're taxing ourselves with it. But this card is so strong, and the surprise factor of it is just devastating. And speaking of which, with Thalia, now furthermore, all non-creature spells are being taxed. So against other decks that aren't heavy creature based or like a non-mirror match, this card is going to do a ton. Thalia All-Star in multiple formats. It's going to cripple spell-based decks as well, tax them so hard that they can't do anything. It's going to delay Wrath of God effects from control and just make it a nightmare for your opponent if they have any spell density whatsoever, any non-creature spells in their deck. So it's just, this card is incredible, and the synergy with this combined with Mana Tithe is great because they're already being taxed here, but they're also being taxed here by Esper Sentinel, and you add in Mana Tithe, and suddenly it's just absolute hell for them to even resolve spells. And oftentimes they're never going to play around this if they're already being taxed in this way and other ways, because they're so desperate to play the spell when they finally reach the mana. Like oftentimes they're just going to, they're going to cast Collected Company for 5 or Wrath of God for 5 or whatever, and then that just gives you easy pickings with a Mana Tithe to wreck their day and win the game. So all these taxing effects are just incredible when they kind of compound and stack up with each other. They work really nicely to make things just absolute hell and frustrating for our opponents. So also the last card in the 1-drop slot, we've got 3 Giant Killers, just another great 1-drop. Again, this can be a spell. Sometimes we can play Chop Down, which will be taxed by our own Thalia, but we can live with that. But at worst, this is just a 1-drop, 1/2 human with the ability to tap other creatures. So if things get out of hand, our opponent has really strong creatures, we can always tap them, or we can just outright kill them with Chop Down. Just another great 1-drop human. 3 copies here. Great card all around, again, from the broken, busted set called Throne of Eldraine. But moving on, in the 2-drop slot, 4 Luminarch Aspirants. Awesome card in a taxing deck like this where we kind of slow things down. Every combat phase on your turn, you're just going to get more and more value. You're adding more and more +1/+1 counters. You're growing all your creatures and getting unstoppable. And an obvious good target for a Luminarch Aspirant, of course, is Esper Sentinel. We talked about earlier, we can pump him up, make it even more difficult for your opponent to pay the tax. So this card is just another bomb, all-star, 4 copies. Moving on, we already talked about Thalia, Garden of Thraben, so we can skip her for now, but look at Thalia's Lieutenant. Just another awesome card in the Humans tribe. This card is playable and been played for a long time in the modern Humans archetype, but just a 2-drop 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, we put a +1/+1 counter on every other human we control, and then furthermore, every other human that enters the battlefield under our control after this is in play, we get another +1/+1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. So this thing's going to grow your whole army. It's going to continue to get bigger, and your opponent's going to have a tough time stopping it, again, with all these taxing effects. So just a hyper-aggressive card to try to end the game quickly. And again, that's the whole theme with this deck. A lot of heavy disruption with heavy aggression as well to make it really difficult for our opponent. So further, moving on to the 3-drop slot, again in that theme of disruption, taxing, as well as aggressiveness, we've got Elite Spellbinder, 4 copies, 3 mana, 3/1 flyer, but when it enters the battlefield, we get to see our opponent's hand, which is tremendously valuable by itself, just having intel on the game state and what's going on. But we get to exile a non-land card from their hand, and as long as that card remains exiled, which is basically for the rest of the game, they may play it, but they are being taxed 2 more colorless mana. So again, amazing synergy with Thalia and Mana Tithe and Esper Sentinel. All these taxing effects make it so difficult for your opponent to cast spells. Like, you're going to end the game so quickly that if you cripple and take away their most important spell in their hand, it might be like a 5 mana spell, but it costs them 8 to cast it, or effectively 9 because you're Mana Tithing it. It's already taxed by Thalia. It's been taxed by this. Maybe they had to pay a cost on a Sentinel because they don't want you to keep drawing cards and overrunning them. So this card's just absolutely awesome. And flying helps big time too. It's the only flyer in the deck, I believe. So being able to fly over opponents and kill them that way is great as well. Moving on, we've got one copy of another relatively new but ultra powerful human, Adeline Resplendent Cathar. Just another interesting, powerful bomb human. It's vigilance, star 4. Its power is equal to the number of creatures you control. Hopefully we have a healthy amount of creatures, so it's going to be like a 3/4, 4/4. But whenever we attack, in a one-on-one situation, we have one opponent, so we get to immediately create a 1/1 white human that's tapped and already attacking. So this is pretty sweet because the wording on the card, it's whenever you attack, not whenever she attacks. So even on the turn you drop this, if as long as you're attacking with something else, you're at least getting one human kind of for free and just overrunning them that way. But again, it's a legendary 3-drop, so we're not going to get too crazy. We're just going to run one copy because she's a legend, but powerful card for sure. Devote, it deserves one slot here. Moving on, Ranger-Captain of Eos, another 3-drop, 3/3, ultra powerful human. We get, when it enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for a creature with mana value 1 or less. So this can act as a tutor for important humans and just create more value on top of all the card draw that we're getting from Esper Sentinel. But depending on the situation, we just getting an extra body is going to help late in the game and grinding games. So this will fulfill that role. But we can search up a giant killer and destroy another creature. We can get another Esper Sentinel for just more value. Or we can get a Dauntless Bodyguard. Maybe we've got a creature that's gotten really powerful and we want to protect it. We can just go search up a bodyguard and have further reinforce our battlefield. Or again, if we're worried about a sweeper, this is a good pick to just follow up and have just bolster our defenses so that we can survive Wrath of God effects and preserve at least 1 or 2 creatures when a Wrath of God does go off. So just an awesome card, but we haven't even talked about its other ability yet. On top of the searching, it has an activated ability that says, sacrifice Ranger-Captain of Eos. Your opponents can't cast non-creature spells this turn. This is definitely an expert level card. It requires great awareness on the game state and what your opponent might have, but this card can seal in or lock games for you, lock games in your favor where you win, where maybe on their upkeep, you sacrifice this and they can't cast a Wrath of God to clear your board. Or even on your own turn, rarely, but there could be really isolated situations where you might want to use it. But typically, you're going to be using this on their turn to prevent them from going off. Maybe they have a combo that they can establish. Maybe they're about to drop the 9 lives combo. You can sack this and suddenly they can't play spells for a turn. It's almost like a soft time walk, really. So it's, again, just further taxing them, which has great synergy. We already talked about all these other taxing effects. Well, here is one where, forget how much a card costs. We just lock them out. The card reads that they can't even cast spells at all, non-creature spells anyways. So try not to forget about that ability. It can be easy to, but always be aware that you can do that with this card because that is so powerful, and sometimes it can mean the difference between a win or a loss. So very powerful effect indeed, that not a lot of cards allow you to lock your opponent out from even casting a spell. So very interesting, powerful card for sure. And rounding out the deck, we've got just 2 copies of Skyclave Apparition. We're not going crazy on this card or anything. It's not a human, however, it is a creature. And it is a creature removal spell. So it's not going to be taxed by our own Thalia. Again, it's not a human, so no synergy there, but it's important to have at least a little bit of removal. If we face a 9 live Solemnity combo, we have no way to do non-conventional damage, so we have to have a way to remove a Solemnity if that gets dropped on us so that we can still win the game. But even if we didn't have these, it's not necessarily imperative. There's still a lot of ways to, combat prison-style decks with the Mana Tithes we already talked about, and the Thalias are just going to slow things down, hopefully long enough that we can just win the game. So it's just a sweet deck. tremendous aggression and tremendous disruption as well, and so much synergy in all these cards. And best of all, again, it's monocolor, which I love monocolor decks. You have very clean mana bases, as we see here, just 20 planes and a couple Castle Ardenvales. We're not doing anything with snow here. Castle Ardenvale is an interesting land in that we don't have to risk like losing in combat if we activate it and we're actually attacking with it, where we would like the other creature-based lands. With Castle Ardenvale, we're making tokens, so we can also kind of win an attrition battle against other control decks by just making lots of tokens if the game actually goes that long. But most importantly, this is white mana. I don't really want to put a lot of colorless sources in this. It's important to leave one white up to always be threatening that Mana Tithe, especially if the opponent has seen one. Suddenly you instill fear in their head. They don't know that you maybe don't have one, but now they have to respect and consider that you do, which is just a powerful, instilling fear in the opponent by just showing them one copy. They now have to worry if you have more. So again, we've got just a very clean mana base so that we can be sure to have Mana Tithe up and be able to cast as many spells as efficiently as possible. Castle Ardenvale, it's not like that snow land that turns into a 4/3 creature and only produces colorless. This produces white mana, so that's good. It's also should never be coming into play tapped. We only have 2 copies, and we would not want to keep a hand that's happened to be so unlucky that it was 2 mana, but they happen to be our only 2 Castle Ardenvales. You would want to pitch that hand because we want to curve out, of course, in an aggro deck. But we can talk more about the gameplay and some of the play patterns in a later video. Please check that out. I'll put up a gameplay video of that soonish rather than later, where we'll take this on the Mythic ladder and see how it does. But that's the deck. Let me know what you think. Please like and subscribe so we can help grow the channel. And good luck on the ladder, guys. Peace.